Right now on Morning News Now, a war of words to win your vote. President Biden and former President Trump facing off in the first presidential debate of the season.
He was the worst in all of American history.
If he wins this election, our country doesn't have a chance.
The two candidates sparring over key issues and even making personal attacks.
How many billions of dollars do you owe in civil penalties for molesting a woman in public, of having sex with a porn star?
I didn't have sex with a porn star. His son is a convicted felon.
We have a team standing by with highlights, takeaways from both sides, from Mr. Trump's false statements to concerns over President Biden's performance within the Democratic Party. Also this morning, another decision day for the Supreme Court with several cases still on the line. This just one day after two consequential decisions. One clears the way for emergency abortions in Idaho. Another kills a multi-billion-dollar bankruptcy settlement for a pharmaceutical giant. We're going to bring you the latest as the Supreme Court's term now stretches into July. Plus, the Independence Day exodus is underway. Millions of people getting an early start on their holiday travel as early as today. But could severe storms disrupt your 4th of July plans? You can expect when you head out the door. And passport to Paris, the City of Light buzzing with excitement less than 1 month from the Summer Olympics. And one BMX racer is going for gold and for redemption. We're going to talk to Team USA's Felicia Stansel about her second quest for Olympic glory after barely falling short 4 years ago. Good morning. Good to have you with us on this Friday. I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is on assignment. We begin with the race for the White House and the first presidential debate of the 2024 election now in the books. President Biden and former President Trump went head-to-head for 90 minutes in Atlanta without a studio audience in what was often a personal debate. It was the first time they shared a stage in 4 years and the first time this year that voters could hear the candidates talk about the issues at the same time. The presumptive candidates traded blows throughout the night. President Biden struggled with a raspy voice, his campaign later telling NBC News he had a cold. The president appeared to lose his train of thought at times during the debate, prompting a wave of panic now among Democrats, while Mr. Trump doubled down on his grievances and falsehoods, keeping fact checkers busy through the night. Here are some of the highlights.
This is a pivotal moment between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump in their rematch for the nation's highest office. Each will make his case to the American people with just over 4 months until Election Day.
Now, please welcome the 46th President of the United States, Joe Biden. And please welcome the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump.
We have the greatest economy in the history of our country. We have never done so well. Everybody was amazed by it. Other countries were copying us. He has not done a good job. He's done a poor job, and inflation's killing our country. It is absolutely killing us.
Well, look, the greatest economy in the world. He's the only one who thinks that.
He caused this inflation. I gave him a country with essentially no inflation.
There was no inflation when I became president. You know why? The economy was flat on its back. If you take a look at what Trump did in Ukraine, this guy told Trump, do whatever you want and do whatever you want. And that's exactly what Trump did to Putin, encourage him, do whatever you want. And he went in. We're in a state where in 6 weeks, you don't even know whether you're pregnant or not, but you cannot see a doctor, and have him decide on what your circumstances are, whether you need help. The idea that states are able to do this is a little like saying we're going to turn civil rights back to the states, let each state have a different rule. Look, there's so many young women who have been, including a young woman who just was murdered, and he went to the funeral. The idea that she was murdered by an immigrant coming in, and I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either. Let me tell you about January 6th. On January 6th, we had a great border. Nobody coming through, very few. On January 6th, we were energy independent. On January 6th, we had the lowest taxes ever. We had the lowest regulations ever. On January 6th, we were respected all over the world. All over the world, we were respected. And then he comes in, and we're now laughed at. We're like a bunch of stupid people. What they've done to some people that are so innocent, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. What you have done, how you've destroyed the lives of so many people.
How many billions of dollars do you owe in civil penalties for molesting a woman in public, for doing a whole range of things, of having sex with a porn star on the night while your wife was pregnant? I mean, what are you talking about? You have the morals of an alley cat.
I didn't have sex with a porn star, number one. Number two, that was a case that was started and moved. They moved a high-ranking official, a DOJ, into the Manhattan DA's office to start that case. That case is going to be appealed.
The question was, will you accept the results of the election, regardless of who wins? Yes or no, please.
If it's a fair and legal and good election, absolutely.
Well, let's see what your numbers are when this election is over. Let's see. You're a whiner. When you lost the first time, you continued, you appealed and appealed to courts all across the country. But you continue to provoke this lie about somehow there's all this misrepresentation.
I just won 2 club championships, not even senior, 2 regular club championships. To do that, you have to be quite smart.
I got my handicap, which when I was vice president, down to a 6. But by the way, I told you before, I'm happy to play golf if you carry your own bag.
That's the biggest lie, that he's a 6 handicap.
Highs and lows there. For more on the debate, we are now joined by NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard in Atlanta. He's covering the Trump campaign. We're also joined by NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli. Good morning to both of you after what was a very late night and now an early morning. Vaughn, let's start with you and former President Trump's performance. I mean, he often kept referencing the southern border, even when asked about other issues. That was clearly a strategy. What's the Trump campaign's response to the debate, and what are some of the takeaways from his night on stage?
I talked to multiple senior advisors after the debate last night here in Atlanta, and to say that they are exceedingly confident in the performance of the former president would be an understatement. After the Biden campaign had left the spin room area, the Trump campaign was there, essentially making the case that they have been able to expand the map electorally. They think that they can pick up places like Minnesota and New Mexico based off of the fact that millions of Americans were going to be watching the debate performance last night. Donald Trump entered this with plenty of vulnerabilities for criminal indictments, and he was found to have previously sexually abused a woman in a civil case just earlier this year. He was found to have engaged in repeated financial fraud, and yet there was little pushback from the current president. And also, when Roe v. Wade became a topic of conversation, Donald Trump really drove that conversation of women's reproductive rights by suggesting that states now have the ability to do what they so desire. I want to let you hear Donald Trump talk apart about that.
As president, would you block abortion medication?
First of all, the Supreme Court just approved the abortion pill, and I agree with their decision to have done that, and I will not block it. We brought it back to the states, and the country is now coming together on this issue. It's been a great thing.
Thank you. President Biden?
It's been a terrible thing, what you've done. And if I'm elected, I'm going to restore Roe v. Wade.
So that means he can take the life of the baby in the 9th month.
As you said, the former president also focused a great deal on the fact that there has been a record number of illegal crossings into the United States under the Biden administration, but also the steady rise of prices around the country since Joe Biden took office. Joe.
All right, Mike, let's talk about President Biden's night. At times, he seemed to stumble over answers, had that raspy, soft voice, especially at the beginning. The reason this matters is heading into the debate, voters have expressed concern about Mr. Biden's age and his sharpness. So tell us more about his night and what his campaign is saying in response to some of the concerns.
Well, Joe, the Biden campaign has believed, listen, the president over 3.5 years in office has built a record of accomplishment that is the envy of his predecessors. They've also raised a record amount of money. They've built a massive campaign operation to try to reach voters across the country. The missing piece, and one reason why they wanted this debate earlier than we've ever seen a presidential debate before, was so that President Biden could now bring those skeptical voters, voters who have tuned out this race so far, haven't wanted to address candidates that they don't like on either party about some of the major issues for President Biden, the economy and his age. Now, in that very first question President Biden faced on inflation, he really only may have made those concerns about both issues even worse. Let's listen to how President Biden answered that first question.
We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our health care system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Joe, that was the moment Democrats really were fearing this entire campaign. And when you heard from campaign advisors as the debate was going on, the first thing we heard was, well, he had a cold. Well, that may explain the voice, but maybe not the performance. Vice President Kamala Harris was out doing cable news interviews when this was over. She said, listen, yes, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. It was a slow start, but he finished strong. The campaign saying they raised a record amount of money after the debate, that the dial test, the polling that they were doing showed that voters in swing districts, swing states, didn't like what they heard from Donald Trump. But we're also hearing privately for now and perhaps publicly very soon from Democrats who really do wonder, should Joe Biden be the candidate going forward?
So, Vaughn, no matter what, this is expected to be a tight race until November. If the 2020 results are any indication, as well as the polls, we're still waiting on a VP announcement from Mr. Trump. Where does the campaign go from here with just weeks until the GOP convention, which goes first this year?
Right, there was some talk that potentially he would make that vice presidential announcement before even the debate, but it's now looking more likely sometime between now and the Republican National Convention that begins in Milwaukee about 2.5 weeks from now on July 15th. You know, for Donald Trump, you know, in the little scrutiny that he faced last night, this was a win for him because there was talk that potentially a running mate could help, you know, make the case to others around the country, independents, reticent Republicans, that Donald Trump would have somebody in office who would be potentially a more moderating force here. But coming out of that debate last night here, this is so very much even more so on Donald Trump's timeline as we're 4 months out from the general election.
We know those three frontrunners for the VP candidacy were there in Atlanta last night. So, Mike, President Biden stopped at a Waffle House after the debate today. He's going to Raleigh, North Carolina, then here to New York City. What can we expect from him today? Is calming nervous Democrats the top priority right now?
Well, one of President Biden's favorite expressions is to quote his father, when you get knocked down, you just got to get back up. And that is going to be put to the test. I'm here in Raleigh, where the president arrived late overnight. Advisors say that this is going to be a campaign rally with a lot of optimism, a lot of really signaling what they were trying to do. North Carolina is a state that Donald Trump won 4 years ago that they think they can flip. We'll see Democrats across the board joining him at this rally, as well as Fat Joe. But the question is, can he begin to explain to Democrats what happened last night and signal that he's still got the fight in him going forward?
All right. Vaughn and Mike, thank you both. Appreciate you joining us this morning. Let's bring in NBC News senior Washington correspondent and News Now anchor Hallie Jackson. Hallie, good to have you with us. So let's break it all down, starting with the struggles President Biden had on stage last night. Where does the Biden campaign go from here?
Well, physically and literally to where Mike Memoli is in North Carolina right now, right, which is a state that they hope to win. The Biden campaign is putting, obviously, the president out. He's got this rally planned. That's where he'll be looking to turn the page, essentially, from last night. Let me tell you a little bit more about where they might go from here as it relates to some of the concern that we've been talking about now inside the Democratic Party from some, obviously not all, lawmakers, wondering anonymously, by the way, at this point, whether President Biden should actually remain on the ticket here. You're also seeing this in some of the more left-leaning op-ed pages, for example, this morning, with some calls now for President Biden to seriously consider that. The next question is going to be, how real is that movement? Is this just a few days of quote-unquote panic, or is this something that is more substantial here? Now, the Biden campaign will tell you it is clearly the former in their view. They, as Mike has talked about here, have some internal data suggesting that they believe independent voters responded very well to President Biden and were turned off by former President Trump, that it is obviously early days in the race. They're pointing pointing to what they say is their biggest grassroots fundraising day of the campaign so far. And so for them, that is sort of where they're framing this, where they're looking ahead to. Now, again, it is I will tell you, it is real. And I have heard from some Democrats on this that there is concern about the president's performance here. Because remember, he walked into this debate tonight with a pretty clear mission in front of him. One of the biggest concerns that voters consistently talk about, Joe, as it relates to the president is his age. So the mission was in part to alleviate those concerns. It is clear that was not accomplished tonight. The concerns about his age were not alleviated based on the president's performance, as even his own vice president articulated that it was not a strong start. Now, again, his allies, his aides, his advisors will say he got better as the night went on. The question is, how long does this debate bounce or inverted bounce potentially last for President Biden, Joe?
Hallie, let's talk about former President Trump. Once again, he used the debate to air his grievances. He at times seemed to ignore questions about climate change and child care to focus on those grievances. He also did make a lot of false statements about abortion, January 6th, the economy, and more. What stood out about his night?
Yeah, the grievances, the misleading attack, the flat-out lies, for example, about the 2020 election, the whitewashing, if you will, of what happened on January 6th, downplaying what happened on the attack on the Capitol. A lot of that, in some ways, overshadowed by President Biden's struggles. But for former President Trump, this was, if you watch his rallies, Joe, if you go to his campaign events, it was in some ways familiar from the former president. He got personal at times against President Biden, invoking, obviously, his son Hunter. And so that was the dynamic for former President Trump on stage. I will tell you, different fallout, quote unquote, if you will, a different reaction. I was in the spin room last night and probably talked to like half a dozen Trump aides, Trump surrogates, Trump advisors who had come out almost immediately wanting to tout what they saw as a decisive win here from former President Trump. Listen, you're always going to hear something like that, but I'm told by one ally of the former president that he was jubilant in the moments after the debate, thinking that he did well, that he showed what he's got and showed how he can lead the country forward. The Biden campaign is pushing back on that idea, suggesting that, in fact, the crucial set of independent voters, pointing to even a subset of Latino voters, were not into what former President Trump was putting down.
Hallie, you mentioned independent voters. We now have this new maybe subcategory of independent voters who we call the double haters, people who are familiar with both of these candidates and don't really like either of them. Do we have an idea yet how much of an impact last night's debate had or might have on those voters?
If I could tell you that, my friend, I'd be blowing through Powerball and out of here, respectfully, in just a second. But let me tell you how I think it could play out here, because there will be polling, right? The pollsters will get out in the field and they'll get a sense. Anecdotally, we know a little bit from this. Our friend and colleague and NBC News anchor Gotti Schwartz was out with a series of what we have dubbed double haters on debate night, watching them watch the debate, essentially. Big picture. The double haters, quote unquote, are going to be important, and here's why. If they sit out, if they don't show up, if they don't go to the polls, that could obviously be damaging in an election that is going to be decided by a very, very thin, very small number of people, a razor-thin margin in just a handful of critical states. These half-dozen states that we keep talking about, including right here in Georgia, will be so key. So obviously it's going to matter. Here's what I would say, too, Joe, just like a little maybe perspective as we look at this night, as we look at what's ahead. It's June, my friend. It is June. Normally, we don't even see debates until further on, presidential general election debates until further on in the calendar. We still have two conventions to come up. We still have the sentencing of former President Trump. We still have what is planned to be another debate in September as well. Joe?
And the lights have gone out. So therefore, Hallie Jackson, we will let you take a moment to rest. And they're back on. The power of Hallie Jackson. Appreciate your reporting throughout the evening and into this early morning hours. Hallie, thanks so much. One of the main topics in last night's debate was the issue of abortion access, a hot button issue that was the subject of a big Supreme Court ruling yesterday. By a 6-3 majority, the justices cleared the way for doctors in Idaho to perform emergency abortions to save a pregnant woman's life, even though the state bans the procedure. It was a procedural order, which means it did not rule on the merits of the case, leaving a lower court ruling in place. Now, the court also issued another major decision yesterday, this one dismantling dismantles the bankruptcy plan for opioid maker Purdue Pharma. To walk us through it all, we're joined by NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley and civil rights attorney Kristen Gibbons-Fedden, who is also an NBC News contributor. Good morning to both of you. Ryan, let's start with you. So by essentially not deciding if Idaho's state abortion law violates this federal law called the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, experts say the court essentially sidestepped the issue. They punted it until perhaps after the election. So what exactly did the court say here? What's the impact of this decision?
Basically, they said this was improperly brought in the first place, essentially a whoops. They shouldn't have taken this up to begin with. And what the dissent said, essentially laid out here, is that this caused some real impact because the court, put this pause on that caused some real impact for doctors and patients as they, in terms of what they were allowed to do, so that this wasn't harmless, right? The fact that they took this up and was in place and then decided actually let that lower ruling stand and let this play out more until it's more right for the court to decide on had a real impact. So, a little bit of chaos there with that decision to first bring it up and then decide that actually we probably shouldn't have taken this up yet. This isn't ready for us to really ultimately decide on the merits here, Joe.
So, Kristen, an important point here. There's other states that have similar laws to this, but this specific ruling from the court does not affect any other states' abortion laws. What kind of challenges do you think we could see in the future? Is this going to make it back to the court and they're eventually going to have to decide on the merits of this case?
I think absolutely. I think it's almost guaranteed, really. As you mentioned, there's multiple states with these same legal issues. And because of the way the court just dismissed it without actually ruling on the substance, like Ryan said, it's going to be chaos everywhere. There's going to be different decisions by different states because there's going to be different interpretations by different judiciaries. And as Justice Jackson pointed out, it's going to be the same legal question that's going to come back, and I think possibly very soon. But ultimately, they're going to be dealing with the federal preemption issue that Ryan kind of pointed out.
Ryan, let's talk about that other ruling that could have a widespread impact. The court blocked the Purdue Pharma opioid deal, which means that states and victims, they could lose out on billions of dollars to combat the opioid epidemic. It also means the Sackler family, which used to own Purdue, not protected from future lawsuits. What did the court find in this ruling, and what other legal challenges could the Sackler family face now?
Yeah, it's really back to the drawing board on a deal. I mean, it scraps the deal, this idea that you have to basically come up with a new solution, because the solution that they came up with, had that big settlement, but also protected the Sackler family from further losses, right? So it was sort of one of those scenarios where you get a negotiation where not everyone's happy or everyone has something they didn't like in the deal, and that's where they were able to land on. So now this sort of just resets the process and doesn't allow that deal to go forward, and they have to figure out what they're going to do to try to get the money to the victims of the Sackler families, what they did here.
So, I mean, Kristen, understandably, attorneys for the victims in the Purdue Pharma settlement are upset. They know that they might lose out on these billions of dollars of restitution. Is it possible we could get a new deal?
Oh, yeah, I think the likelihood of a new deal is high. Absolutely. Because what we're dealing with here is there's going to be strong pressure to actually probably increase the funding and increase accountability so that the Sackler family is not shielded from liability in the future. So I absolutely think so. I think there also could be potential for increased financial compensation, even though $6 billion sounds like a lot, given the intense effect and impact of the opioid epidemic and how it has affected not just individual victims, but states have sued as well, governmental entities. I definitely think the increased pressure will increase the compensation as well.
Ryan, real quickly, we expect more decisions today and now into early next week. Real quick, what's the big ones we're waiting for?
Presidential immunity, that's the big one that everyone's waiting for. There's also another January 6th case that everyone is very interested in that could affect two of the charges against Donald Trump, as well as prosecutions of January 6th defendants altogether. But the ultimate spectrum of January 6th defendants it could impact is only in the few dozens, given how these cases have played out. So it won't have this sprawling impact on the January 6th case, but there definitely will be cases it'll impact. And more importantly, the immunity case with Trump is the one that everyone's looking for.
All right, Ryan and Kristen, thank you both for breaking down these big decisions. We appreciate it. Much more to come here on Morning News Now. Later this hour, financial fears now fueling a new trend when it comes to getting ready for retirement. We're going to break down the strategy for so-called super savers and how it could help your future. Up first, after the break, out of office and into traffic. We're going to show you the conditions on the road and in the skies ahead of the big 4th of July holiday.
And more heavy rain is on the way for the Midwest, reigniting flood concerns for already saturated areas. Coming up after the break, we'll tell you what's in store for the weekend ahead in that region.
Welcome back. Now, you may still be trying to finalize your July 4th plans, including where to watch fireworks, but the TSA knows one thing for sure. Next week will be busy. It is bracing for yet another record-breaking week of travel. The TSA forecasting that more than 32 million people will take to the skies over the next week. To give you an idea as to how many people are traveling these days, the TSA already broke the record for most individuals screened on a single day. That happened earlier this week. NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa joins us from O'Hare International Airport with more. Maggie, good morning. So today alone, more than 3 million people will likely be screened. So if you're flying, what do you need to know, and what is the TSA saying about it all this morning?
What you need to know is that even though it's kind of counterintuitive, it feels early, the 4th of July travel rush has already begun. In fact, the TSA is saying today, tomorrow, and then Wednesday, July 3rd, Joe, are actually expected to be their peak travel days. So we talk about the golden rules of like getting somewhere 2 hours ahead of time, allowing for that extra time in case the security lines are backed up, and also having a backup route. They say that's even more important this early on. Again, we're talking about today, tomorrow, and Wednesday of next week. So they're just saying take that golden advice and kind of inject it with steroids already, because the holiday rush, Joe, is underway. It's busy here this morning. We had a huge line here until about 30 seconds ago. It's just been crazy already. And again, we have almost a week to go. And that's the nature of television. The moment you go live, that giant line suddenly vanishes. So I know. I'm really glad it went away before our live shot. Exactly. So, I mean, here's what we do know. Millions across the country are dealing with severe weather and damaging storms. We've been talking about it for days now. Put simply, stormy weather, busy airports, that's a bad combination. So how could the weather impact travel? It could impact travel in all the ways that we've seen before when it comes to, as you put it, stormy weather kind of colliding with flight plans. But here's the thing that's really interesting and that stuck out to me about this summer in particular. Experts are also warning that people should take into account the extreme heat when they're booking their travel plans. Airlines have at times heat-related delays because when it gets extremely hot, sometimes they have to enforce weight restrictions on planes, and they can do that by bumping passengers or by delaying flights. So they say the best advice is to try to book your flights in the morning or the evening to avoid those peak heat times. Just another facet of kind of this world of severe weather we're living in, Joe. So many things to think about. Some good advice there. Maggie Vespa at O'Hare, thank you so much. Let's take a closer look at that weather and what to expect this weekend as heavy rain is moving through the already soaked Midwest. Meteorologist Angie Lassman's here with the forecast. Angie, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. This is not the news that folks across the Midwest want to hear. More rain in the forecast. This is going to be something they deal with through the day today on already really saturated grounds that have been problematic with the flooding concerns for days now. Here's the picture of what these morning storms look like. Minneapolis, Waterloo, even Chicago going to start to see some of this rain working in. Kansas City as well. We're going to see this batch of moisture kind of shifting to the east here as the day goes on, but we've got another chance for some severe weather into our afternoon hours and potentially sticking with us for our evening hours as well. 9 million people are going to be with us with those wind gusts potentially impacting folks. That's our biggest concern, over 75 miles per hour. But like I mentioned, the flooding is still something that we're keeping a close eye on. Now, the bad news is we do still have some spots under major flooding concerns, moderate flooding as well. But when we look at how much rain we're going to see across those areas, it mostly looks like the heaviest of the rain that we're expecting through tonight is going to stay to the south of those areas that are dealing with the worst of that flooding. So still, though, Kansas City area and points east and north could potentially get up to maybe 2 inches of rain by the time we get into the evening hours tonight with this batch of moisture working through. By tomorrow, 19 million people at risk. For your Saturday plans, heads up, Pittsburgh, Columbus, Cleveland, all included in that, Buffalo as well, where we'll see, again, the chance to see some strong wind gusts. Not quite as strong as today, but still the hail, maybe a tornado or two, not going to be able to rule those out into our Saturday plans. As far as the weekend is concerned, otherwise, the West is staying hot. The South is staying hot. We've got triple digits across parts of Texas, Oklahoma, the Southwest as well. The northern tier of the country actually going to see below average highs, so mild conditions into the 60s and 70s for folks in the upper Midwest. So once they do finally dry out, they'll actually have some nice conditions, and those highs stay real nice for that same region as we get into Sunday too, though. It's the severe storms that we'll watch hugging the East Coast that we'll have to watch for, Joe, and those Southwest storms will be in the picture as well. West Coast looks like plenty of sunshine for folks there.
At least some places going to have a nice weekend, all right?
Good
Angie,
and the bad.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Turning now to the Middle East, Israeli forces are bombing a neighborhood in Gaza City this morning. This comes one day after IDF ground forces stormed the same area which they had attacked earlier in the war with Hamas. NBC News crews inside Gaza captured the moment the Israeli military began the operation. It shows Palestinians fleeing the bombing. The team described the scene as harrowing, adding that, quote, death was present in every corner. NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley joins us now from Tel Aviv. Matt, what more are we hearing from our team inside Gaza about this latest Israeli attack in Gaza City, and what are the Israelis saying about it?
Well, the Israelis released a statement today talking about this attack, saying that it was based on intelligence they got, saying that there was terrorists who were hiding out, and they say amongst the civilian population. And the Israelis say using the civilian population as human shields. Now, our teams in Gaza and the Gazan health authorities, which are run by Hamas, they have said that this attacks, which have been ongoing for several days now in the neighborhood of Shuja'iyya, that they sent hundreds of people running for shelter and for safety. And from as far as the Gazan health authorities said, they said at least 7 people had been killed, but some of those people and some of the missing are still stuck under rubble. So those numbers are likely to go up. But Joe, one of the important things to mention here is that this is kind of a glimpse of what the Israelis say is going to be the future of their operations in the Gaza Strip. We've heard from Benjamin Netanyahu to senior Israeli military leaders saying that they were entering a next phase of the war, one in which they're going to be doing sort of more pinpoint operations like we're seeing here. There's nothing that looks particularly surgical about this. This really does look like a massive firefight, but still, it's not the same style of attacks that we've seen over the past several months. Joe?
Matt, our NBC News crews were also present for the first medical evacuation of 21 children from Gaza in nearly 2 months. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, as you just mentioned, this is the first medical evacuation since May. Most of these children, and my colleague Andrea Mitchell was covering this on Nightly News last night, that most of these children are afflicted with cancer that is treatable or would be treatable under normal circumstances. And the reason why they need to leave the Gaza Strip is because they don't have access to adequate medical care or food or medicine. And that is, a major issue because a lot of these hospitals have been almost completely destroyed in repeated Israeli attacks. There hasn't been aid that's been getting into the Gaza Strip. And again, a lot of these children are afflicted with cancers that in other circumstances, in modern medical facilities that are not afflicted by war, they would be treatable. So this is the result of Israel's continuing attack on the Gaza Strip, that these children need to be evacuated. There were nearly 70 people who left the Gaza Strip, all told, these around 20 children and their adult companions. Most of them don't know where they're headed. They left from the Kerem Shalom border crossing and are headed to Egypt. They don't know where their final destination is, but it was a diplomatic victory getting them out of there.
All right. Matt, thank you for that news. Appreciate it. We have more international news now. In Iran, the polls are open for a snap election to choose a new president there. NBC News international correspondent Claudio Labanga has that and other world headlines. Claudio, good morning.
Joe, good morning. That's right. Iranians are heading to the polls to choose a new president after the former president, Ibrahim Raisi, died in a helicopter crash last month. Now, usually, Iranian presidential elections don't provide surprises, as candidates are carefully chosen by the clerics. But this time, there seems to be a wild card. Masoud Pezeshkian, a reformist, former head surgeon and health minister, stood out after he called immoral the actions by Iran's morality police, who enforce strict dress code on women. He also promised to improve relations with the West and revive nuclear talks in the hope of bringing an end to sanctions against Iran. Let's go to Bolivia now, where on Thursday, President Luis Arce denied accusations that he was behind a failed coup. The denial came after the general who allegedly led the coup, Juan José Zuniga, said the president had ordered him to carry out the mutiny so to boost his flagging popularity. Arce called the allegations a lie and said the general acted on his own and will now face justice. The general and at least 17 soldiers who took part in the attempted coup were arrested. And let's end this tour of the world in Japan, where sports authorities announced that the 2025 Tokyo Marathon will allow athletes to select non-binary as their gender identity during registration. On top of that, gender-neutral restrooms and changing areas will be available at the start line, finish, and along the course. And there will also be seminars on LGBTQ+ issues at the event. In a news release, the Tokyo Marathon Foundation said that they wanted to become the most inclusive race in the world. Back to you, Joe.
Some progress there. Claudio, thank you so much. Coming up, the former police chief of Uvalde schools in Texas now arrested and charged more than 2 years after the mass shooting that killed 21 people, 19 of them students. We're going to take you to Texas for the latest. Plus, a landmark moment for the birthplace of the modern gay rights movement. We'll take you inside the new Stonewall National Monument Visitor Center, opening to the public later today. This is Morning News Now. We are back with a major legal development in the 2022 school shooting at Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas. Pete Arredondo, a former school district police chief there who was widely criticized for the failed response to the attack, has now been arrested. He's charged with child endangerment after the shooting, which killed 21 people, including 19 kids. NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson joins us with more on this from Uvalde. Priscilla, good morning.
Yeah, Joe, good morning. You may remember that former Chief Arredondo was fired shortly after that shooting, and now the criminal fallout is coming in to focus, specifically related to the missteps of law enforcement on that fateful day. And it comes after more than 2 years of the families of these victims demanding greater accountability. This morning, the first criminal charges have been filed in connection with the tragic Robb Elementary School shooting in Texas more than 2 years ago. Former Uvalde School District Police Chief Pete Arredondo taken into custody by law enforcement and charged with abandoning and endangering children, according to an official at the Uvalde jail. The arrest is in connection to Arredondo's role in the failed response to the mass shooting that killed 19 children and 2 teachers.
We were about to give up hope.
Berlinda Ariola's granddaughter, A. Jo Garza, celebrated her 10th birthday 2 weeks before she was murdered.
I don't consider this a happy moment. Lives are still being ruined because of this, and unfortunately, they did not do their job.
Just months after the massacre, the Uvalde School Board fired Arredondo from his position. At the time, his attorney called the move an illegal and unconstitutional public lynching. Arredondo led the response by over 300 officers from local, state, and federal agencies. More than 70 minutes passed from when officers first arrived to when they finally took down the gunman. Arredondo is also one of the defendants named in a $500 million lawsuit filed by the families of the victims last month, alongside nearly 92 Texas State Police, the Uvalde School District, and other staff.
There was an obvious systemic failure out there on May 24th. The whole world saw that.
This after a damning Department of Justice report in January uncovered cascading failures of leadership, tactics, and training. Jesse Rizzo lost his 9-year-old niece, Jackie Cazares, that tragic day, and says while still heartbroken, he's grateful for the indictments.
It's more than what you had before. And so, hopefully there's other people that are going to be indicted that maybe get charged with a little bit more.
And on that note, we know that overnight Arredondo was released on bond. That's according to the sheriff. We're also told by a parent of one of the victims that the district attorney's office tells them that there's another officer that has also been indicted on similar child endangerment charges. And just for context, Joe, there were nearly 400 officers who responded to that scene that day, and it's unclear if there could be more indictments to come. Joe?
All right, Priscilla, thank you so much. Today marks a historic milestone for the LGBTQ+ community. As part of our Proud Out Loud series, we've covered the history and significance of the 1969 uprising at the Stonewall Inn, which became the birthplace of the modern gay rights movement. Well, later today, the Stonewall National Monument Visitor Center will officially open its doors for the first time in New York City. It is a space meant to honor the legacy of the Stonewall uprising, which took place in that very spot 55 years ago today. It's also the first LGBTQ+ visitor center to be recognized by the National Park Service. The area surrounding the Stonewall Inn became the country's first national monument dedicated to LGBTQ+ rights back in 2016. If you're interested in a visit to that visitor center, it will be open every Tuesday through Sunday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. All right, coming up, could you give up your car for 5 weeks? What if someone paid you $1,000 to do it? When we return, the new campaign by Uber to get more vehicles off the road. And 401k fail. Millions of Americans falling short when it comes to their retirement funds. But a new trend is encouraging people to save big. One of our favorite financial experts, Caleb Silver, is here to break down what it takes to be a super saver. Next on Morning News Now. We are back with financial news. It looks like Nike is landing on the wrong foot this quarter as shares on Wall Street plunge. CNBC's Bertha Coombs has that and other money news. Bertha, good morning.
I see what you did there, Joe. Well, shares of Nike just aren't doing it for investors this morning after the company reported lower than expected sales this past quarter and reduced its outlook for the rest of the year. Nike is grappling with weaker demand from consumers, saying that this is going to be, quote, a transition year. Nike is cutting production of lower selling classic sneakers and is waiting for potential gains from newer shoes and excitement from athletes like Caitlin Clark to take hold. Meantime, the king of pop owed more than $500 million to creditors when he died in 2009. The executors of Michael Jackson's estate filing a petition this week seeking court permission to pay several law firms for their services. They say Jackson's major assets were subject to more than $500 million of debt and claims by creditors. They've managed to turn the estate's finances around since then, largely by selling stakes in the publishing rights that Jackson owned to Motown Classics and the song catalogs of Carole King and Norah Jones. And Uber is looking for some folks to ditch their cars for a month. The ride-hailing company has a new promotion where it's going to pick 175 people in select cities in the U.S. and Canada. Those cities: Los Angeles, a big car city, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Miami, San Francisco, Toronto, and Vancouver. The folks selected will be given free Uber rides and credits for bike share and public transit to stop driving. You can sign up online for the trial, which starts on July 22nd. Now, you've got to be 18 years or older. You have to have a driver's license and a car that you use more than 3 times a week and be comfortable sharing your experience. New York City is not on that list because a lot of us do not drive more than 3 times a week.
Exactly, or have a car.
We don't get the free rides.
All right, Bertha, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Let's look ahead to the future of your money with a potential concern for those with 401ks and other types of retirement plans. A new study reveals that retirement balances are falling short of what people will need to live on once they retired. A 2023 Transamerica study finds 56% of workers are saving 10% or less toward retirement. Who else to break it down? Who better than the friend of the show and editor-in-chief at Investopedia, Caleb Silver. Caleb, good to have you with us. So first of all, why is this happening? Why aren't people saving enough?
Because they think they need that money to pay their expenses, right? Everything's getting more and more expensive. So when you look at your 401k options, when you're signing up for a job or if you move to a new job, you're like, can I afford to put 10%, 15% away? It's just going to take away from what you think is going into your bank. This is actually paying yourself for the future. But for a lot of folks, they just can't muster it or don't think they can muster it. So you only have, as you said, 56% of people saving 10% or less. The good news, 44% are saving 10% or more, and then they're called super savers. These people that are really diving into their 401ks, about 15% of those are saving between 11 and 15%. The earlier you start here, the more you save, the better. It's just really hard, especially in your first few jobs.
44% actually seems kind of high for me. I'm surprised there's that many people who are super savers.
Yeah, well, the older you get, the easier it is to save because you're earning more income. But in those first 10, 15 years of your career, it's really hard to even imagine saving 10% out of that paycheck.
Let's take a look at some new research from investment group Vanguard. 53% of clients with incomes of over $150,000 contributed the maximum amount to their retirement plans. Explain how wealth inequality and age can play into people's balance.
Yeah, and this is the thing about 401ks. It is on you, right, as the employer, as the saver, to save for your retirement. So the knock is, if you don't make a lot of money, the 401k is not helping you because you can't put enough away. So when you look at that number from Vanguard, that just tells you higher income people benefit more from 401ks because they can put away more, and if they could take advantage of the company match, they're doing even better. When you look at the average retirement balances by age, we're woefully underfunded. When you think it takes about $1.4 million if you're going to retire at 65 and you're going to live to about 85 or so, you're going to need a lot more than what we're saving.
It's not too late, especially if you're young. So what can we do to maximize our retirement?
Yeah, it's not too late. And a lot of people feel like I'm never going to get there. You have to be able to pay yourself into the future. So you got to start early and you got to be consistent about it. If you change jobs, make sure you roll that 401k over. Very important. Work your way up to 15% contributions. I know it's hard at the beginning, but as you get older, make a little bit more money, keep putting more away. Add to that and take advantage of that employer match. But you can also not just rely on the 401k, open a Roth IRA if you need to. If you have a side hustle, open a SEP account. Get multiple accounts going so you take advantage of the ninth wonder of the world. That's called compounding. You got to start early. The earlier you start, the better you are off down the road. You give yourself a big old hug when you're 65.
That's a great way to put it. It really is amazing. When you are younger, it feels like, what am I doing here? I don't get it. And then suddenly, when you get into your 40s, you start to see, oh, this really is adding up.
Yeah, everything all at once, but compounding and saving for the long term is a marathon.
All right. Great advice, Caleb Silver. Is always good to have you with us. Coming up, less than 1 month out from the Summer Olympics, and for one BMXer, the road to Paris has been full of setbacks. We're going to talk to Team USA's Felicia Stansel as she goes for gold. Stay with us. Morning News Now. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We are less than 1 month out from the Paris Olympics. Qualifying rounds are in the final stages, but some U.S. athletes have already punched their tickets to France. One of those athletes is two-time Olympian and world champion BMX racer Felicia Stansel. She says her Olympic dream is one that started at a very young age during a tragic time for her and her family. Well, now with the love and support of her dad, and now at the pinnacle of her career, she hopes to bring home the gold. And we are so excited to have Felicia join us this morning. Good to have you with us. Congrats on making it to the Olympics for the second time. How are you feeling?
Thank you. I'm feeling really good. I'm currently in Paris practicing on the track that we will be racing in next month. So I'm feeling really good, and the first step of qualifying is done, but now the big step of preparing for the actual race is going on. So just working hard at the moment and very excited.
You're like, oh, if I have to go to Paris early, then I guess I'll go to Paris early, right?
I guess.
Now, you've publicly shared your personal journey that led to your BMX career. You lost your mother when you were just 3 years old, and it was the year after that that you realized your dream of becoming an Olympic BMX racer. How did that time in your life shape the person and the athlete you are now?
Yes, it was definitely something that is not typically normal. My mom unfortunately passed away on my 4th birthday. But then a year later, my dad showed me the sport of BMX. So through like a difficult time, I think BMX is what my dad brought me to show all his love. And we ended up creating something very special with that. But yeah, it's just been a journey racing BMX. And now over 20 years later, I'm still doing it, going for my second Olympics.
You most definitely created something special. I know you started traveling internationally for competitions when you were just 9 years old. Your dad was your coach at the time. I mean, what was that like, and how did that impact your relationship with him?
I think it was very, very special. My dad and I just traveled all around the world, internationally starting at 9, all across the country starting at 6 years old. So it's just something very, very special that we shared together, the passion for BMX. And yeah, I don't know if I would have gone this far if other scenarios, situations would have happened of my mom, but I think we took something that was unfortunate and just created an amazing career together. And he definitely taught me a lot about the sport. He's one of the first BMXers. He used to race, and that's how he knew so much about it and taught me so much. So yeah, I'm forever grateful for everything he's taught me about the sport.
We have about a minute left here, but I want to talk about what happened at the Tokyo Games. Less than half a second stood between you and an Olympic medal. What did you learn from that experience, and how are you using that to prepare for this year's Games?
I think the biggest thing I learned from the Tokyo Olympics was my mindset that I had during the time. I definitely worked really hard, and fourth place was still an amazing place to finish at my very first Olympics. But I think the mindset I had at the time was to work hard and hope for the best. And I didn't realize that was my mindset at the time, but now looking back, that was. And I think now I'm trying to work hard and make it happen instead of just hoping, if that makes sense. So I think that's the biggest difference between this Olympics and last Olympics is I'm probably more confident in wanting to make it happen instead of hoping.
It all makes sense, and we will all be pushing for you and cheering you on as we get closer to the Olympic Games in Paris. Felicia Stansel, thank you for your time this morning. Best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And be sure to tune into the Paris Olympics Friday, July 26th on NBC and Peacock. That's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now, but stick with us. The news continues right now. Good morning and happy Friday. I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is on assignment. Right now on Morning News Now, it is being called a debate disaster for Democrats. President Biden struggles in a face-off against former President Trump in Atlanta overnight, where the pair traded personal attacks.
Every single thing he said is a lie.
You're destroying our country.
How many billions of dollars do you owe in civil penalties for molesting a woman in public, for doing a whole range of things, of having sex with a porn star?
I didn't have sex with a porn star, number one. His son is a convicted felon.
How Mr. Biden's shaky performance is now leading some in his party to tell NBC News he should exit the 2024 race. Well, the clash also saw former President Trump double down on his familiar falsehoods. We have a full recap of perhaps the most consequential night of the 2024 race so far, plus the latest reaction from voters. Also this morning, another decision day. The Supreme Court poised to deliver more rulings following a major call on the hot-button issue of abortion rights. The justices sidestepping a decision on whether Idaho hospitals can provide emergency abortions, meaning they can still take place in that state. Plus, the decision that leaves billions of dollars secured for victims of the nation's ongoing opioid crisis now in limbo. We're breaking it all down as we wait for the hugely significant verdict on former President Trump's bid for immunity. And get ready for that holiday hop. The July 4th travel rush officially in full swing this morning. And AAA is expecting a record-smashing 70 million Americans to take to the highways and skyways over the next few days. So what can you expect if you're headed on a summer getaway? We've got you covered, including the all-important holiday forecast in just a moment. And if it's Friday, you know we've got your can't-miss list on deck, the latest and greatest in the world of entertainment for your weekend. That includes the verdict on the highly anticipated return of the acclaimed restaurant drama, The Bear, back for a third season. Can't wait for that. Let's begin this hour with the first presidential debate of the general election between President Biden and former President Trump. They sparred for 90 minutes in their highly anticipated first debate against each other in 4 years. The president seemed to struggle at times with his responses in a performance which confirmed some people's fears about his age and abilities, while Mr. Trump went on the attack, doubling down on his stances on big issues and his grievances and keeping fact checkers busy with a long list of false statements. NBC News Now anchor Hallie Jackson leads off our coverage from Atlanta.
Hey there. President Biden's struggles in some ways overshadowing the multiple lies and grievances from former President Trump, as both candidates now look ahead to rallies later today in states they hope to win.
On stage in the presidential debate, missteps from the current president and misleading attacks from the previous one. From President Biden, who's battling voter concerns about his age, a shaky start. With a raspy voice, he seemed to lose his train of thought when asked about the national debt.
Making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Later, mixing up former President Trump's name in a comment about Russia before correcting himself.
If you take a look at what Trump did in Ukraine, this guy told Trump, do whatever you want, and do whatever you want. And that's exactly what Trump did to Putin, encourage him, do whatever you want.
At the end of the debate, First Lady Jill Biden escorting him off stage. Two sources telling NBC News President Biden had a cold. Former President Trump pouncing on his rival's slip-ups.
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
From Mr. Trump, a series of dodges and lies about the 2020 election, refusing to deliver a clear answer when asked whether he'd accept the results this November.
If it's a fair and legal and good election, absolutely.
I doubt whether you'll accept it because you're such a whiner.
Halfway through the debate, President Biden bringing up Mr. Trump's conviction.
The only person on this stage is a convicted felon is the man I'm looking at right now.
And getting very personal.
How many billions of dollars do you owe in civil penalties for molesting a woman in public, for doing a whole range of things, of having sex with a porn star on the night while your wife was pregnant? I mean, what are you talking about? You have the morals of an alley cat.
Give you a minute, sir.
I didn't have sex with a porn star.
The president also slamming Mr. Trump for reportedly calling veterans suckers and losers, referencing his own late son who served in Iraq, with Mr. Trump denying he ever said it.
My son was not a loser, was not a sucker. You're the sucker. You're the loser.
Regarding January 6th, Mr. Trump downplaying what happened during the attack on the Capitol.
On January 6th, we were respected all over the world. All over the world, we were respected. And then he comes in, and we're now laughed at. We're like a bunch of stupid people.
Both candidates trying to make their cases on issues key to voters, from the economy.
He decimated the economy.
To abortion access.
The Supreme Court just approved the abortion bill, and I agree with their decision to have done that, and I will not block it.
President Biden pivoting to immigration in his answer on abortion, one of his strongest issues, according to polls.
The idea that states are able to do this is a little like saying we're going to turn civil rights back to the states. Look, there's so many young women who have been, including a young woman who just was murdered, and he went to the funeral. The idea that she was murdered by an immigrant coming in. They talk about that.
Afterwards, Trump surrogates flooding the spin room to tout what they saw as a decisive win.
I thought President Trump was calm, strong, thoughtful tonight.
Vice President Kamala Harris hitting the airwaves to defend the president.
There was a slow start, but it was a strong finish.
But multiple Democratic lawmakers telling NBC News they're concerned about the president's performance, with some wondering anonymously whether he should remain on the ticket.
To the Dem panic that's bubbling up tonight, you say?
Do more, worry less.
And President Biden himself stopping at a Waffle House for some food overnight, responding to some of these concerns, telling reporters, in his words, it's hard to debate a liar. And his campaign is pointing to some internal data suggesting that independent voters responded well to President Biden and were turned off by Mr. Trump, pointing to what they describe as their biggest grassroots fundraising day of the campaign so far. Back to you.
All right, Hallie, thank you so much. For more on last night's debate, let's bring in NBC News senior national politics reporter Jonathan Allen. John, good morning. Thanks for joining us. So in some of your new reporting overnight, some Democrats have actually started to call on President Biden to step aside so the party can nominate another candidate following his performance. You see the headline there saying he should throw in the towel. What are you hearing?
Yeah, Joe, I mean, there's certainly a mixed set of views among Democrats. The vast majority of them think that there was a debacle for their party last night. Some of the Democrats that I spoke to and some of our colleagues spoke to last night in the aftermath of the debate said that it's time for Biden to step aside and make room for another Democratic candidate. They, I think, some of them saw basically their worst nightmare version of Joe Biden last night. All the people I spoke to were reluctant to say it. They said that they had misgivings. They like Joe Biden. They appreciate the work he's done as president, but in the end, they don't believe that he will be a strong candidate against Trump in the fall.
Let's be clear, there's no suggestion right now Mr. Biden won't be running in the fall, but since the issue has come up, we should ask you, if Democrats did decide to go down the hole of finding a replacement, if Mr. Biden did step aside, how would that process even work?
Joe, your guess is as good as mine. No, I'm just kidding. It would be an ugly process. You would see a brutal intra-party fight among the Democrats. So Biden could step aside. The only other way that he would be denied the nomination is if there was a revolt among the Democratic delegates to their national convention in August, which, the vast majority of them were elected to become delegates to the convention by pledging to support Joe Biden at the convention. So it's hard to see that happening. So it really is an option for Biden as to whether he wants to continue or step aside. Now, if he did step aside, the Democrats would have to make a decision about who they wanted next, and that could be even more difficult than what they're facing now. You've got a vice president in Kamala Harris, who's the first black vice president, the first woman vice president. If there was an attempt to deny her succeeding Joe Biden, you could see just a real fight within the Democratic Party that would split and aggravate some of the divisions between the factions of the party.
John, let's turn to former President Trump's performance last night. When you get down to the issues and the substance, there was a long line of false statements, whether it was January 6th or abortion or the economy. What were the takeaways from his debate last night?
There's almost no answer that Donald Trump gives that you would look at and say that is objectively truthful. He's somebody who boasts. He's someone who covers up his weaknesses, often with deception or dishonesty. At the same time, the two performances were so starkly different in terms of the energy, in terms of the stamina of these two candidates, in terms of the acuity of these two candidates, that the substance appeared to be immaterial, Joe. I mean, I didn't talk to a single Democrat last night who talked to me about anything relating to the substance of the debate, the contrast on the issues. Everybody was talking about either their desire to see Joe Biden move aside, or, to your point, what they saw as Donald Trump spouting a whole bunch of lies. But nobody I spoke to on the Democratic side last night said anything about any of the issues.
All right, John, I know it was a busy night for you last night. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, and thank you for your reporting. This is about the reaction, so let's talk about that, especially from black voters in Pennsylvania. President Biden flipped that battleground state in the last election, with the black vote seen as vital to the victory there. The question is support from that voting bloc waning this time around. NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster joins us from Philadelphia, where he watched the debate with a group of black voters. So first of all, Shaq, set the scene for us. Tell us a bit about the people you watched the debate with last night and what the numbers are telling us about President Biden's support among black voters right now.
Good morning, Joe. And let's be clear here, because polling does show that President Biden is still winning black voters at an overwhelming rate. The difference is it's not the levels that we saw in 2020 that helped usher him to the White House 4 years ago. It's not that 92% share that he won. So we came here to Philly to talk to a group of black voters who watched the debate with them, because this is a place, this is a city where you saw in the past month visits from both Donald Trump and Joe Biden making direct appeals to black voters. And these voters told us heading into the debate that they were worried about the economy. They were disappointed in Biden on the war in Gaza. And we wanted an opportunity to watch their live reactions as they were watching the two candidates on stage, Joe.
To it, what was their reaction? Did this change anyone's mind?
Well, one important thing to note, Joe, these are all folks who voted for Biden in 2020. Only one of them before the debate said that they were still with him. Listen to some of their reactions after the debate.
think this debate was bad for our country. I think, we're in a very difficult spot as a nation, just very frankly.
You don't like the two options that you saw tonight?
I don't imagine that if anybody's being honest, that anybody is excited or enthusiastic about either of these candidates.
If the election were tomorrow, who would you vote for?
Me? Say no. I'll vote for Biden, for sure.
Would that have been your answer before the debate?
No, I wasn't sure.
So you see there was, for at least that one voter, a shift toward Biden. The big question is, how are other people witnessing and reacting and digesting that debate last night?
Shaq, we know the age of these candidates is a huge talking point among voters. So how did the group feel about their performances with that in mind, especially that one moment when President Biden really struggled to finish a thought and then was cut off by the moderator?
Yeah, that was a moment that actually replayed for them at the end of the debate because it's been getting so much attention and so much conversation. Listen to how they reacted to it.
I didn't think that one moment took away from everything else that he had to say.
You know what happens? I thought Trump was unhinged for 90 straight minutes. So I think comparing that little stumble from Biden to racist rantings for 90 minutes, it's like there's no comparison, right?
And one good thing to keep in mind here, these are folks who were tuned into the debate. They were watching every minute of it, talking to themselves about the reactions and their own reactions in real time. Most Americans don't watch the debate like that. They see the clips, they see the highlights, they see the conversation afterwards. So there is sometimes a divide between what people believe and hear once they're watching in real time and how they feel afterwards. And that is something that we'll watch in the days and weeks to come.
Very interesting to hear their immediate reaction. Shaq, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it. As Americans get ready to celebrate the 4th of July, officials predict the holiday travel rush will set a new record. Nearly 71 million people are expected to take some kind of trip, according to AAA. And the TSA predicts that this could be one of the busiest travel periods ever for airports across the country. There is concern that all this could be hampered by severe weather. NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa is live at Chicago O'Hare Airport with more. Maggie, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning. That crowd that we talked about an hour ago is kind of back here at O'Hare. And I mean, it's worth pointing out we're not even in July yet, but the July 4th travel rush is officially on, with TSA expecting close to 3 million screenings today alone. And overall, summer travel is expected to get a record-breaking boost for America's birthday.
With just days to go until fireworks fill the skies, July 4th travelers are already taking off at record-breaking levels. AAA predicting a record 70 million Americans will travel this holiday week, with some 60 million hitting the roads and another 5 million flying to their location. Both totals topping last year's July 4th travel rush, overall numbers slated to smash records set before the pandemic.
Every year prior to the pandemic, travel had been moving up steadily. And then once 2020 hit, we fell off a cliff. For the first time, we're kind of back on that trajectory again where we should have been all along.
Airport traffic expected to peak today, tomorrow, and Wednesday, July 3rd. The surge coming with good news for flyers. Domestic airfares are actually down 18% from last year, averaging $263 a ticket. Gas, meanwhile, jumped a nickel in the last week, but the current nationwide average of $3.50 is still 6 cents cheaper than a year ago.
No matter how high gas prices are, once people have decided they're going to take a vacation, they take the vacation.
Still, experts warn even the most patriotic travelers should prepare for the unexpected. America's birthday this year coming amid an onslaught of severe weather, with violent storms battering the Northeast this week and catastrophic flooding impacting neighborhoods in the Midwest.
Everything I have in there is gone.
And as temperatures continue to soar across the country, travel experts recommend booking morning and evening flights to avoid delays caused by heat. Advice aimed at making the most of this Independence Day.
All right, so with all that in mind, it's obviously a good idea to leave extra time, especially if you're headed through one of these 5 airports. Hopper listing these as the ones expected to be the busiest across the country during this July 4th travel rush. You can see Atlanta, Dallas, Denver, Chicago, and LAX. As far as drivers, we have tips for them too. Among them, experts say avoid at all costs, if you can, actually driving on the 4th, especially between 2 and 7 p.m. Otherwise known, Joe, as kind of that last-minute rush, like the rush hour to make it to those fireworks displays. I'll send it back to you.
Some good advice, Maggie. Thank you so much. Let's stick with weather. We're keeping an eye on 3 different storms in the tropics, with one that could develop into a tropical depression. Let's get a check on your Morning News Now weather forecast with meteorologist Angie Lassman. Angie, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Joe. I know it's June and it is, in fact, hurricane season, but we usually don't see it quite this active at this point across the tropics. But that is exactly what we're getting here as we gear up for the end of June. Here's the deal. We've got a couple spots that we're watching. One that's in parts of the Caribbean Sea. We're going to see likely a 30% chance of that developing. We'll watch it over the next week or so. It's kind of just a disturbed area of weather right now. We're going to see if that can get into something, maybe bring some heavy rain to folks across Mexico in the coming days. But we've also got one area coming off the coast of Africa, just to the south of the Cape Verde Islands, just a 20% chance of development for that. But it's this one where you see 90% that we're going to keep a close eye on here as we move through the next at least couple of days, and especially into the next week or so. Tropical disturbance 95L will likely see this become a tropical depression or a tropical storm in the short term. So we're talking about maybe today, maybe tomorrow, and then it'll continue to move to the west. You see where the models are taking it in pretty good agreement at this point. Folks in the Windward Islands, the Lesser Antilles, those are the spots that we're going to watch to see potential impacts down the line. If we see this kind of favorable environment continue, which we likely will, again, this could be a tropical depression or tropical storm by later today or even late tomorrow. Meanwhile, back on land, we've got temperatures still calling for heat alerts. 46 million people under these heat alerts at this time. Notice it's mostly centered across parts of the plains in the south. We're going to keep Houston, Dallas, Wichita, Oklahoma City in those heat alerts with temperatures well above normal for this time of year and quite steamy, if I'm being honest. 100 degrees for the actual temperature in Dallas. It'll feel like 109 later today. Even Atlanta into the low 90s, but feeling like 98. Jacksonville, you're going to feel like 106 with all that humidity in place today. And we'll keep it going for tomorrow, too. 111 for the heat index value in Little Rock for the afternoon hours of your Saturday. Roswell, Wichita Falls, Del Rio, all with actual temperatures of 100 degrees, Joe, and we keep, unfortunately, that heat in place as we get into early next week. It will most definitely be feeling like July across this region.
It is July, so I guess it should feel like July. All right, Angie, thanks so much. Appreciate it. This morning, we're taking a closer look at a Supreme Court ruling on the hot-button issue of abortion rights. Yesterday, the court dismissed an appeal brought by Idaho officials on whether to ban doctors in that state from performing abortions to save a mother's life. That means the procedures are still allowed in the state for now. But the ruling sidestepped a bigger question, whether Idaho's ban would conflict with a federal law about care for emergency room patients. NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett breaks it all down.
Hey there, good morning to you. The Supreme Court's term is almost over, and as usual, they have saved the biggest decisions to the very end. This case out of Idaho crystallizing the stakes involved when states pass strict abortion bans, a byproduct of the justices overturning Roe v. Wade just 2 years ago this week.
This morning, the battle over who can get an abortion and when marches on. The Supreme Court clearing the way for women in Idaho to receive abortions when their health is in jeopardy. For now, but sidestepping a more conclusive decision on precisely what care doctors must provide going forward.
I think it puts us back in this holding pattern of uncertainty. So we can provide emergency care for stabilization in Idaho for women, but we don't have the reassurance that EMTALA is the law of the land.
EMTALA, shorthand for a federal law the Biden administration says requires hospitals to provide abortions if necessary to protect a woman's health, while the laws in Idaho and at least 6 other states only allow abortion to save a woman's life.
We'll continue to litigate it vigorously.
A majority of the justices opting to punt the issue of who wins to the lower courts for now, in a brief, unexplained opinion, identical to the one mistakenly posted online Thursday. Justice Alito and Justice Jackson blasting their colleagues for refusing to tackle the merits of the issue. Alito saying they were swayed by the, quote, emotional and highly politicized nature of the issue. Jackson writing, as long as we refuse to declare what the law requires, pregnant patients in Idaho, Texas, and elsewhere will be paying the price. All this as the high court wades into another closely watched battle, a multi-billion-dollar bankruptcy plan involving Purdue Pharma, maker of the powerful painkiller OxyContin. That deal thrown into uncertainty now that the justices found the plan would have shielded the Sackler family from liability. It also means billions of dollars secured for victims could now be threatened.
Now, the court will release more opinions this morning as we wait to see a decision on whether former President Trump is immune from any prosecution. Today, however, won't be the last day. The court making the rare move to go into July with more expected opinions on Monday as well. Back to you.
All right, Laura, thank you so much. In Oklahoma, the state's top education official is ordering schools to teach the Bible from grades 5 through 12. In a memo sent out to all school districts, Superintendent of Public Instruction Ryan Walters says the new rule will be effective immediately. The memo goes on to say that schools are instructed to refer to the Bible and the Ten Commandments for their, quote, substantial influence on our nation's founders and the foundational principles of our Constitution. Here with me now to discuss, NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos. Danny, good morning. So the superintendent expects, quote, immediate and strict compliance with this new rule. Under state law, how can he enforce this?
If you would ask me that question 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago, the answer would have been dramatically different, because at the time, Supreme Court precedent really dictated a test called the Lemon Test. And if you have excessive entanglement between church and state, then whatever the state is doing is usually unconstitutional. But all of that may have changed a couple of years ago, or in the last couple of years, when the Supreme Court decision came down, and you may recall it was the football coach who wanted to pray after the game at the midfield of the football field, that we may be under a new regime, which is an analysis instead of the historical traditions of what is being taught in the school. So it appears that a lot of these school districts and states are saying, well, as long as we can tether it to some historical tradition in the United States, it may now pass constitutional muster. This is untested. It may not survive, and you can expect there are going to be swift challenges. I think there's already a promise of swift challenges in the courts to come.
And certainly there's criticism, including the group Americans United for Separation of Church and State. They're calling this an abuse of public office. What could their argument be, especially if this does go to court, which it almost certainly will?
It will certainly go to court, and the argument is rooted in the Constitution, which really commands that there shall not be entanglement between church and state. But as is often the case, sometimes the Supreme Court creates new precedent, and we're all left to interpret it. And what I would see this as is that some states and school districts are taking an aggressive interpretation of Supreme Court precedent and saying, well, we read it as saying just as long as we have some connection to historical traditions, then we've got a shot at surviving, and we'll take our chances in the courts. Maybe the thinking is, hey, at least it'll last for as long as it takes to get to the appeals courts. In all likelihood, this kind of connection between schools and religious instruction is not likely to survive, no matter what current Supreme Court precedent is.
Now, in addition to this, the Republican governor of Oklahoma, Kevin Stitt, also just approved a set of rules that includes time for prayer in schools. Is this a different issue?
It's all really in the same bucket. Okay. Anytime you have a public school, any kind of public entity, and most often you see it in schools, and you see the introduction of prayer, whether it's organized prayer, unorganized prayer, a particular denomination, you're going to get a challenge. Under the old regime, it was the Lemon Test, which looked at excessive entanglement. Now, it's not entirely certain what that test will be, but given that the Constitution has always been so clear on this issue, this seems to be a pretty easy decision when and if it makes it to the Supreme Court.
All right. Danny Ceballos, thanks for joining us this morning. Appreciate it. Much more to come on this hour of Morning News Now, including some new developments in the murder case against Brian Kohberger, when we now can expect him to formally stand trial. But first, Decision Day in Iran, as voters there head to the polls to elect a new president after the sudden death of their former president last month. We're going to break down what's at stake next. Welcome back. Voting is underway in Iran to decide who will be the country's next president. But with a carefully controlled group of candidates allowed to stand, it's unclear whether the result will lead to real change. NBC News national correspondent Yasmin Vasugian explains the process and what's at stake.
Iranians will head to the polls to cast their ballots for the next president of their country, after the last president died in a May helicopter crash.
Iran State TV has just announced that the country's president, Ibrahim Raisi, was killed in a helicopter crash.
President Raisi crashed near the Iran-Azerbaijan border in foggy conditions. According to the country's constitution, a new president will be elected within 50 days of Raisi's death.
These elections could prove to be somewhat of a litmus test in terms of where power is going to go next in Iran.
But Iran's elections have never been viewed as either fair or free by the international community. A theocratic country with Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei at the helm. All the candidates are chosen by the Supreme Council, a conservative body whose sole purpose is to uphold the Islamic Republic.
Only a very limited number of regime loyalists are allowed to run for president in Iran.
Only one, Dr. Masoud Pezeshkian, is considered more, quote, moderate.
Pezeshkian is essentially trying to say to people, your problems may be a 10 out of 10 now. If I win, I can try to make them a 9 or an 8. No one is promising very meaningful reform.
Some Iranians have been on a collision course with their country's government since Mahsa Amini, a 21-year-old woman, died while in police custody back in 2022. She was arrested for allegedly not wearing the country's mandatory headscarf to the authorities' liking. In response, protests erupted around the world.
I think that one of the most impressive things about the Women Life Freedom movement is the participation of men. They realize that their freedom is tied to the end of gender apartheid within Iran.
Before former President Raisi died, authorities launched a renewed crackdown on women and men, which police there are calling Noor, or light. Videos surfacing of women being forced into vans and cars being seized, all because of brave Iranians choosing to defy Islamic law and not wear a headscarf, although NBC cannot independently confirm the circumstances of their interactions.
You're living within a society that economically is drowning. It's a broken system. The youth, which is empowered by social media, wants a new life and a new way of being.
While the Supreme Leader has ultimate power in Iran, he is 85 years old with failing health and no clear successor. So this election may be more consequential than others that have come before it.
Our thanks to Yasmin Vasugian for that report. More international news now. A powerful earthquake hit the coastal region of Peru early this morning. NBC News international correspondent Claudio Lavanga has that and other world headlines. Claudio, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. That's right. The south of Peru was rocked by a 7.2 magnitude earthquake this morning. Now, the epicenter was located west of the town of Atiquipa, which has been felt as far as in the capital Lima, which is about 372 miles away. Now, on social media, residents near the epicenter said the tremors were very strong and felt their beds shaking, while CCTV footage showed people coming out of their houses in a panic. Now, the Prime Minister of Peru said that no deaths have been registered following the quake. Let's go to Taiwan now, where its citizens were urged to avoid traveling to China after Beijing threatened to hunt down and execute supporters of the island's independence. The threat follows the election of Lai Ching-te, the pro-independence leader of the Democratic Independence Party, as president. Taiwan also warned their citizens to avoid traveling to the semi-autonomous Chinese territories of Hong Kong and Macau. And let's end this tour of the world in Tuscany here, where if your dream is to move there, well, now you could even be paid to do so. In June, the regional administration in Tuscany announced a scheme that offers financial incentives to people to move to rural communities there, offering grants ranging from $10,000 to more than $30,000 to help with the cost of buying and renovating a home, especially in mountain areas that need to be repopulated. Where is the catch? Well, there's none if you're an Italian or European citizen. If you're not, you will need a long-term residency permit lasting no less than 10 years and register as a resident in the town you choose to buy the house in. Well, apply away.
Sounds
Even
good.
you, Joe.
All right. I might consider it. All right, Claudio, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Coming up, another summer COVID wave is here, but this year some doctors are reporting patients with a wider variety of symptoms. That's making it harder to diagnose. So what do you need to know to stay safe this season? The doctor is in. Up next. Welcome back. A trial date has finally been set in the murder case against Bryan Kohberger. He's the suspect charged in the stabbing deaths of 4 University of Idaho students back in 2022 after prosecutors say he broke into their off-campus apartment house. We get the latest from NBC News contributing correspondent Kaylee Hartung.
Hey, good morning, Joe. This is a date most of the victims' families have been desperately waiting for. In a hearing Thursday, legal teams on both sides of the case agreed to begin the trial in June of next year. A lawyer for the family of victim Kaylee Gonzalez told me they're one step closer to justice.
State versus Bryan Kohberger.
More than a year and a half since 4 University of Idaho students were fatally stabbed in their off-campus home, a date has now been set for the murder trial of suspect Bryan Kohberger. Attorneys on both sides saying they'll be ready to go to trial on June 2nd, 2025.
It makes sense that we do the trial in the summertime.
I think it's reasonable to go ahead and pick the June of 2025 as a trial date.
The judge proposing that start date as pretrial hearings continued to drag on.
And I think at this point, this is my opinion, that we're getting to a point of diminishing returns, but I think this is a great step.
The November 2022 killings of Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin devastated the tight-knit college town of Moscow, Idaho. Kohberger was arrested 6 weeks after the killings, a judge entering a not guilty plea on his behalf. The victims' families have been left in limbo as a litany of pretrial motions have played out. A lawyer for Kaylee Gonzalez's family telling us the trial date is an important step forward.
To have to wait a year and a half just to get a trial date set, is that too long to wait in the eyes of the victims' families?
The family realizes that the criminal justice system has to take its process, but, a lot of their frustration is stemmed from just not having a trial date.
Kohberger's attorneys making clear they're agreeing to the date, but not the location. The defense is still trying to get the case moved out of Latah County, arguing they can't get an impartial jury in the area where the killings took place.
We haven't been heard on our change of venue yet. That's to totally understand that. So I don't want anybody thinking I'm agreeing to Latah County.
While Ethan Chapin's mother has said her family doesn't plan to attend the trial,
it doesn't change the outcome.
The Gonzalez family plans to be in court for the duration.
It's a place and a time that they can look forward to justice.
So this case will have about 2 weeks for jury selection, and then the actual trial is expected to run 8 weeks, meaning it would conclude by the end of next summer. The court does not expect that timeline to change no matter where the trial takes place. There will be another hearing on that potential venue change 2 months from now. Joe.
All right, Kaylee, thank you. As we battle a summer COVID wave, doctors are urging people to get tested if they're sick. They say with so many strains and mutations of the infection, it's hard to diagnose on just symptoms alone. NBC News medical reporter Erica Edwards joins us with more on this. Erica, good morning. So what else are doctors saying about why it's harder to diagnose COVID right now?
Hey, Joe, good morning. Yeah, remember 4 years ago when it was a fever that was a sure sign of COVID? Yeah, that's all gone now. Doctors say that there is a wide variety of symptoms. Some people, get maybe a headache, a sore throat, a mild cough, congestion. Others only have gastrointestinal symptoms like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. Now, some still do spike a fever, but doctors say that's much more rare now. The only sure way to know whether a person has COVID, Joe, is to take a test.
Help us understand why the symptoms have changed and evolved so much over the last 4 years.
Yeah, well, like you said, there have been so many mutations and changes. The virus has changed to make it spread more easily from person to person. The good news now is not causing a severe illness, but also, all of us now have some level of immunity, whether that's through repeated infections or immunizations or both. And so our bodies are just reacting differently now. Joe.
So if you think you have COVID, when should you test? When should you isolate? We know oftentimes people think they might have COVID. They take a test. It's negative. But then a day or two later, after those symptoms showed up, well, then they have a positive test.
That's exactly right. Doctors say that especially on day one of symptoms, those COVID tests can provide false negatives. So the advice now is to take a test on day 2, 3, or even 4. Stay home from work or school while you're still feeling, ill. There are no mandates for isolation anymore. The best advice, Joe, is to just stay away from people, lay low until you're feeling better.
Yeah, reminder, if you're sick, whether it's COVID or not, best to not get other people sick as well. So, Erica, a CDC panel met yesterday to talk about vaccine recommendations for the fall. We're approaching that time once again. What do we know? Do we know when we might get the next round of shots?
Yeah, the next round of shots should be available in August or September. The CDC once again recommends that everybody ages 6 months or older get those vaccines. The shots are being reformulated now to more closely match the strains that are going around. The CDC Director Mandy Cohen said yesterday, our top recommendation is to protect yourself and your loved ones from respiratory illness. The best way to do that is to get vaccinated. So we'll see who gets it, Joe. As of last month, only less than a quarter of U.S. adults were up to date on those COVID shots. Joe.
All right, Erica, thank you so much. Coming up, a high-profile hack causing some major headaches for the auto industry this morning, and there's no real solution in sight. How this tech nightmare could cost you even more if you're looking to drive off the lot with some new wheels. That's next on Morning News Now. We're back with a big blow for the auto industry. A massive cyber attack shut down a software company used widely by car dealerships nationwide. Now, some businesses are going low-tech to operate. NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky has the latest.
Yeah, Joe, good morning. And at dealerships all across the country, the showrooms may look as pristine as ever, but I can assure you business is far from normal. These cyber attacks are forcing dealers to really go back in time and use pen and paper in some cases, working totally offline. And with no clear solution in sight, these added costs are adding up. Summer is officially here, and with it, peak season for car buying. But this year, there's been a major wrench thrown into the works. A massive cyber attack on the software many dealerships nationwide use for almost everything has brought operations to a near screeching halt.
We can't cut checks. We can't service cars. Everything has to be done by hand.
At McKenna Audi Porsche BMW just outside L.A., owner Danny McKenna says paperwork is now turning a simple car sale into a half-day affair, discouraging many customers. Here we are more than a week in. Do you have any clear answers here?
No. We're just told any day, any time, and we're just waiting like everybody else does.
In Austintown, Ohio, Justin Bradley says his team at Jim Shorkey Auto Group dug up a typewriter to help fill out forms.
We are hand-doing contracts and hand-doing paperwork.
The challenge is arising after software provider CDK Global said it experienced a cyber attack and proactively shut down most of our systems. Cybersecurity experts say the attack appears to be the work of a sophisticated group from Eastern Europe.
Will CDK be able to come back online, or will they just launch and try and replace the entire system with new software if they can't get some sort of ransomware settlement?
The company says we understand and share the urgency for our customers to get back to business as usual. In the meantime, experts say if you're looking to buy a car or get one serviced, contact your dealership to see what your options are. Expect to visit the DMV rather than have your dealer automatically do your registration. And be patient. Dealers still have plenty of inventory. It just may take longer to drive it off the lot.
You may find the vehicle that you want. What you may have trouble doing is getting the paperwork and everything through the system as quickly as you would like.
And this morning, there is a bit of positive news here, guys. CDK says they have been able to restore a small group of dealers back online, but they still don't know the total number of dealerships impacted. And keep in mind that they service about 15,000 nationwide. In the meantime, experts say that it's still too early to tell if specific elements like personal data have been compromised. So at least for right now, it looks like a bit of a bumpy road ahead. We'll send it back to you.
All right, Morgan, thank you. Even more money news. You could say it's a flag on the field for the NFL after a California jury handed down a verdict in a multi-billion-dollar class action lawsuit. CNBC's Bertha Coombs has the play-by-play along with some other money headlines. Bertha, good morning.
Oh, man, the dad jokes are flowing this morning, Joe. That's right. A federal jury says the NFL must pay nearly $5 billion in damages for overcharging subscribers of its Sunday ticket package. Plaintiffs in the case accused the NFL of conspiring with teams to inflate the price of Sunday ticket for millions of residential and other subscribers, such as bars and restaurants. DirecTV was the sole distributor of Sunday ticket until this past season, when YouTube TV took over that contract. A season-long subscription costs now just about $450. Meantime, YouTube is working on new plans for YouTube Premium. There are currently just 3 levels: individual for about $14 a month, family for about $23, and students for $7.99. Now, the YouTube Premium includes perks such as videos with no ads and the ability to download videos to watch offline. It's adding new features now, including picture-in-picture and an AI-powered jump-ahead function. Speaking of AI, Instagram is starting to let some creators make AI chatbot versions of themselves. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg says Instagram is testing the feature here in the U.S. It'll show up primarily in messages and will be clearly labeled as AI. Meta wants to eventually let creators and small businesses create a personalized AI to interact with their communities and customers. So, Joe, for example, you could have yours reply to all those DMs saying, no, I know I look just like Ryan Reynolds, but we're not siblings.
Thank goodness. I've been wondering how I can reply to all those messages, Bertha.
I know.
All right. Whew. Thank you. Have a great weekend, Bertha. Appreciate it. Coming up, it is Friday. That, of course, means we've got your can't miss list. It is a full rundown of the latest and greatest in the world of entertainment. That includes the return of the Hulu juggernaut The Bear for season 3. What are the critics saying about it? Friend of the show and Bravo's own Darren Karp is here with that and much, much more right after this. Finally, as always on Fridays, we have your can't miss list with everything you can't miss out on this weekend, including the eagerly awaited return of The Bear. Bravo personality and host of Shaken and Disturbed, Darren Karp, joins us with everything we have to watch this weekend.
Yes.
It's going to be hot or whatever.
Well,
or stormy.
it's the same every
Well,
day.
New York, it's Pride, so
yes.
everyone will be
Happy
outside.
Pride.
Happy Pride. We'll get to The Bear in a moment, but let's start off with, in the theaters,
yes.
Quiet Place. Day one. I loved the first Quiet Place movie. It's one of my favorite movies.
Me too.
And I don't even like horror, but I thought it was brilliant. So what is this one?
Yeah, The Quiet Place, the original, I think actually makes me think is the most scary movie I think I've seen in a while, just psychologically. So this one is actually a little bit different. John Krasinski is not part of this. He sort of stepped away from the franchise to write and direct If. So this is Michael Sarnowski. So this has a little bit of a different feel. Hit close to home probably for both of us because it actually takes place in New York City. And Lupita Nyong'o plays Sam, and she's sort of visiting New York City at probably the most inopportune time, and now kind of has to acclimate to this new auditory world, or lack thereof, let's say, with a stranger played by Joseph Quinn. So it's just as on the edge of your seat as the other ones, and it's definitely different.
And a reminder for those who've never seen it, you can't make any noise.
You can't make any
They'll
noise.
come
All
get
the
ya.
monsters have supersonic hearing. They can hear a whimper, a cough. You can't make any type of noise. Otherwise, they're going to come attack you in less than like 2 seconds. It's actually terrifying.
Which you don't want. So, all right, this next one sounds fascinating to me. Sean Penn, Dakota Johnson. It's called Daddy-O, and the whole movie is set in a car ride, a taxi ride.
Yes.
From JFK to New York City. This could go one of two ways.
Yes, no, this is a two-hander. It's just Dakota Johnson, just Sean Penn the entire time. Dakota Johnson plays a passenger. She gets picked up from JFK. This happens to us many times. Sean Penn plays this cab driver. And the whole trip, and kind of like My Dinner with Andre, the whole trip is just their conversation that they're having together. But this is kind of Christy Hall's like directorial debut. It is beautiful. It shows you all the traffic that you kind of get caught in, but the conversations are so deep. Even if you watch the trailer, you're kind of enmeshed in it already. The director really did a good job of kind of making this one location really come alive, considering it basically just takes place in the back of a cab.
Yeah, and if it's an hour and a half, that's a long trip from
It's an hour
JFK
41.
to New York.
Yes, it is a long conversation, but it's like almost Sean Penn at his finest, in my opinion.
Okay, The Bear, absolutely one of my favorite shows on TV. Season 3 is back.
Yes.
Carmy and Company, they've got the fancy restaurant now. What are folks saying about it?
Okay, well, all of the episodes actually were supposed to drop today, but all of them actually dropped on Wednesday. So this is just a fast-paced show. I mean, it almost came out a year exactly to the date from when it originally came out. Listen, it's very hard to keep. It got 100% on Rotten Tomatoes the first season. I think now it's at like 94%.
Yeah, I know.
So,
it's slipping.
Yeah, it's like, oh, it's not as good. I'm like, that's still pretty good.
Better than everything else. Yeah.
And this is absolutely excellent. I think this is a little bit of a grittier season. I spoke to Oliver Platt for E! News a few days ago, and he was saying that we really get into the depths and the soul of the restaurant and the characters that are playing here. And Io Adebari, Sydney, the partner, has her directorial debut in episode 6, which is apparently pretty amazing.
All right, that's good. You got to change things up. All right?
Exactly, change it up.
I can't wait to watch it. And again, it's a comedy according to the Emmys.
Which yes, neither here nor there. I don't agree with it.
Fancy Dance is streaming on Apple TV. That's Lily Gladstone.
Yes.
She, of course, was an Oscar nominee this year. This performance is getting rave reviews.
Yes, it is getting rave reviews. In fact, this actually came out during Sundance Festival last year, but it didn't get distribution pickup. But I think with the popularity of Killers of the Flower Moon, Lily Gladstone really pushed this forward. And she plays Jax here, and her sister kind of disappears and goes missing. So she's sort of responsible for her niece, Roki. And as their sort of parental relationship gets threatened by the grandfather who's willing to take over sort of, parenting the kid, they go out on a road trip to try to find the missing mother, the missing sister. And it's really gut-wrenching and really, really powerful. I do recommend watching this.
Lily is so talented.
She's amazing. She's incredible in this.
This next one, TikTok meets the Tudors. That's how some are describing My Lady Jane on Amazon Prime.
Yes, I love it. 8 episodes. So this one's actually different because it's like a historical comedy. If you know Lady Jane Grey, in the 16th century, she became the Queen of England for 9 days before getting beheaded. I think this is probably one of the first people who was more famous for her death than probably her life and her reign. So this sort of flips it on its head, and instead of getting beheaded, she becomes Queen of England for a little bit longer and kind of a different trajectory in life. It's very, very funny and pretty witty, and it gives you a little bit of historical context here.
All right, cool. I like that. All right, we got 30 seconds left. Megan Thee Stallion's got a new album out, her third album,
Her
right?
third album, 18 tracks. The best part is some of these are absolutely incredible. Definitely good to listen to for Pride, but it comes with the Amazon Prime It's Prime song if you listen on Amazon Music, which is like a bonus track to really promote Amazon Prime Day. So it's just like capitalism eating itself, and I kind of love it. But this album is awesome. 18 tracks. We've all been waiting on bated breath for it. I feel like anything Megan Thee Stallion, really delivers on. She said that this would be music she likes if she wasn't Megan Thee Stallion.
Oh, see, that's good.
Which I don't really get, but like, okay, I'm here for it.
Good for her. All right, Darren Karp, good for you. Thank you for being with us this morning. It's going to do it for this hour. Morning news now, but stick with us. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.